Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. The Her Version platform is built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I am going to be speaking with an amazing woman named Amber. When Amber got pregnant, she believed that her life was no longer her own. When her husband cheated on her with a friend, she was at an all-time low. Amber had a choice to make to continue to play the role of a victim of her life, girl, I get it, or to take back her power. Amber is here today to share her steps to regaining your power and recognizing your emotions in order to create awareness of who you are and the potential you hold. Welcome, Amber.
Hello, thank you for having me. That's a wonderful introduction, Sabrina. It's beautiful. Thank you. I love that.
Of course. Thank you. And I want to thank you so much for being here and hanging out and taking some time out of your day to share some of your story in order to inspire and uplift other individuals who are out there going through some stuff.
Absolutely. No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. As always, I love to come and talk to you.
Thank
And
you.
I love to share my story. So, absolutely. Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, I would love to just kind of start out just so we know kind of who you are and your background. If you don't mind, just taking um, a handful of minutes to kind of take us through your journey that you're going to be sharing today and, what it kind of looked like in the past, all the way up into where you are today. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you. So, I'm going to start at the beginning because where else do you start?
Yeah.
I So 2014, and I fell pregnant. Or no, it would have been 2013 that I fell pregnant. My son was born in 2014. At this point in my life, I was living in Egypt, which is absolutely beautiful, but far away from home. I didn't really know very many people, and I'd not long been married either. So when my son was born, I was thrown into quite an unusual world. I didn't have anyone around me that had small children. My family were all back in the UK. And my husband worked most of his time 6 weeks away from home at a time because he worked on liveaboard boats. And so I'd gone from being this person with a relative, as a lot of us do as mothers, not having responsibility for anyone else, living the life in the way that we want to live, to essentially recognizing and realizing that, oh my gosh, there's this little person, and every single decision I make about my life and what I do affects them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that threw me into an incredibly wild state of I can't do anything for myself. So I held this belief for a really long time, and it stemmed from way back, but I just didn't know it at the time. I didn't know I was holding on to this belief. Obviously, all of this is with like retrospective view.
Yeah.
But essentially, I held this belief that my life as I knew it was over. I couldn't pursue my dreams. I couldn't pursue my passions. It was now about my child and their needs and their life. And as a result, I ended up spiraling into a complete 10 months of utter self-neglect. So I was not even showering, eating, sleeping, to the point, it was quite quite dramatic. There was a point where I had like mats in my hair. I always go back to this story, but I had mats in my hair because I hadn't even managed to like shower and wash my hair for multiple days on end. And it was affecting my mental health. So it wasn't just physical care, but it was affecting the way that I felt. I was depressed, I was low, and I was really anxious. And that was the pinnacle point for me, because it got to a point where I couldn't leave the house by myself. I couldn't leave the apartment because I was terrified in my mind of all of these things that could happen. And I just became really trapped and isolated. So that's kind of like where my story begins, because it was a good portion of my early motherhood that I feel I almost robbed myself of those experiences, because I could see other people through social media, friends that had children back home that were doing all of this amazing stuff, taking their kids to soft play, going to these adventures with their partners and friends and family, and I was just in an apartment all day by myself, right? And I blamed people. So I know that I mentioned to you previously, Sabrina, about this victim position, this place of victimhood that we place ourselves in. So this was the first time I'd experienced that. And I'd essentially placed myself in this point of, the world is doing this to me, society does this to me, motherhood has diminished my experience of life, my husband is never around, so it's all his fault, poor guy. At the time, it's all your fault. Like I was putting it on the situation, external circumstances, and not recognizing that I had a role to play. And it was one day I was looking at something else again through social media, because that was my view out into the world at the time. And I was like, why are they able to do this and not me? And that question just prompted this, oh, hold on a second. The common denominator isn't society. The common denominator isn't my husband or any of these other things. The common denominator in this situation is me. And I've made these decisions and choices. And I knew at that point that something was inside me, something was kind of lit up, and it was just a moment of, oh, hold on a second. I'm in control of my life. That's like, I can change this. Nobody else has decided this for me. I chose this. I decided this. It wasn't an overnight thing, but that instant started a journey of me figuring out how I could overcome the anxiety that I had. How could I start creating a community around me that I didn't have and that I longed for, and all of these other things. So I did. I found EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping, and I started using that, and that helped me get out of the house, and it became a process of just venturing further and further. It helped me to talk to more people, to bring people into my community circle, and I started living a life that I was truly living and enjoying. And obviously that benefited my son as well, because he was getting more experiences and he wasn't trapped inside the house. So it was beautiful all round. But then, so I'm living this life. I managed to open 2 businesses. I moved into my dream villa as a result of all of these changes that I'd managed to make. I had a beautiful community of friends that were really supportive. And I just really designed my life in a way that made me feel good about living. Fast forward a few years after, and feel free to stop me at any time, Sabrina, if you have any questions. I'm just ranting on here. But fast forward a few years later, and at this point, I'd had my second child, and little did I know I was pregnant with my third, but I didn't actually know that at the time.
Wow.
And I discovered that my husband had essentially committed adultery with somebody that we knew very well. I'd been introduced to her. She had played with my children, looked after my children. She was very much a part of our lives. And they had held this lie for 3 years. So for 3 years, they'd been married behind my back. And it was devastating. It completely tore me apart, and it threw me straight back into the position of feeling like this is being done to me. And I truly believe now that nothing's ever done to us. But at that time, it really was as if I had been manipulated, and I had been manipulated and lied to in many ways. So that's not far from the truth, but it was heart-wrenching, and it threw me back into a deep state of depression. And it led to, I tried to stick around for months. I was like, ooh, maybe we can make this work. I now know the truth. There's ways around this. Maybe we can. And So I'm Muslim and my husband's Muslim, and having a second wife isn't necessarily, it's considered part of our faith as okay, but it should be done with open trust. Everyone should be involved. We know about it. There's boundaries that are set, and they hadn't been put in place. And so I was like, well, let's maybe if we put that in place now, then I can be okay with this. Like, now I know this person's been in our life. She's a very nice person. Maybe we can. And I just talked myself round into going, yeah, maybe we can make this work, maybe, which is crazy now when I look back at it, because I was like, how is this ever going to work? It's been built on a foundation of lies from the very beginning.
Yeah.
By the time I tried, so I stuck around for months, and as a result of trying to bend myself and convince myself that I was okay with it was okay, I really started to break down as a person, and I went back and I reverted into that not eating. I'm not good enough. I must clean the house thoroughly from top to bottom, and I must make sure meals are on the table to be the best wife ever. And
Wow.
in that process, my husband pulled away from me even further. So he stopped coming home more frequently. He wasn't turning up for the kids when he said he'd be there. Like, he saw it as a free pass to not be available to us anymore.
Wow.
And so there's a whole lot that goes around that, but that's kind of where I found myself, and I got thrown back into this position of all of this stuff's being done to me, and I spent months under duvets crying on the phone to friends complaining. And I was like, eventually I got to breaking point, to the point where it was either take my own life because I feel that bad, or do something about this situation. And I chose to do something about this situation and go back to the tools that I'd already gained all those years ago. And that's why I always start at that part of that journey, because it was the tools that I learned during my period of anxiety and depression back when I was a first time mum, to bring that into this situation and realize that, okay, it's time to take back my power. It's time to take back control. And so I did. I booked a plane ticket, and I told my husband, that's it, I'm leaving. We're taking the kids. I'm going back to the UK. I can't stay in Egypt because there's just too much. It's too much for me. Even if we move out, even if we break up, I can't be here right now because my mental health won't allow me. And
he was okay with that?
I mean, I don't think he was completely okay with that, but he didn't put up a fight. He drove us to the airport. He let me go. And I think he knew by this point, because of the place that I was at emotionally and mentally, that it was affecting our children. And he also knew that he couldn't care for the children by himself either.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it was kind of, and even to this day, he's still, you'll come back. You'll be back one time. I get those messages, I love you, and you'll return, and everything will be better, you'll see. Which now I kind of laugh at. At the time I was like, I just want to be free, I want to get away, leave me alone, like, let me be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he wasn't okay with it, but he knew how far I was, and he's not completely inhuman, you know. He is still a human. He still knows that people have their limits, and he could see at that point that I was at my breaking point.
Yeah. When you mentioned that your husband, the situation that you were in with your husband, wasn't done to you. I understand the concept of that. However, to those listening that might not understand or that get it, but like, how do you do that? Can you break that down for us a little bit? Like, when you're in that situation, how do you view that in a more positive light so that it's not like, this is being done to me? How do you kind of pull yourself out of that mentally? And now looking back, what would you recommend?
So for me, I mean, in the moment, believe me, I did not, like, it was an incredibly difficult thing to separate what was happening. What I tell my clients to do, and what I look back objectively, and the way that I managed to do that was separating myself from the situation. So remembering that what's happening is happening. It's an occurrence outside of us, right? And the way we choose to respond to it, the way we feel about it, our emotional reaction is a choice. It is something we control. That's within inside of us. Nobody else has responsibility over how we feel, over how we think, over how we perceive things to be. That's within our power. The situation itself, I can't control. I can't control the other people inside that situation, but I can control my reactions. I can control how I choose to react to that situation, how I choose to view that situation, and in turn, that changes how I feel about that situation. So, for example, at this point of time, these two people have come together and gone behind my back, and there's been a lot of stories and a lot of incidents and a lot of stuff built up around this. And I could choose to sit there saying, but they've lied to me.
Yeah.
Or I could say, they see them as people, as humans, that actually, if I try and gain their perspective on the situation, perhaps they were afraid to hurt me. You know, we'd known each other for 3 years at this stage, and I'd been married to my husband for 3 years. Maybe they were fearful that, you know, there's lots of things. I will never know what their perspective was unless they are openly willing to discuss it. Okay. Yeah. But I do know that most humans operate from a point of, how do you make your decisions? How is it going to affect me? You know, what am I going to get out of this? You know, we are very self-centered in many ways. As much as we don't like to think we're here to design, our subconscious is designed to protect us, right? Mm-hmm. Us as individuals. So the choices other people make aren't usually to hurt me, they're to gain something for themselves as well. Is that, I think you're making sense here.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that they went purposefully out of their way, we're going to get married to spite me. It was to gain something for themselves.
Yeah.
And so understanding that their choices weren't great, I don't agree with them. It hurts. Absolutely, it hurts. But that they weren't actively trying to do something directly to me, as opposed to that more as they were trying to gain something from themselves. That's the only way I can put this, is that it wasn't done directly to me. They were trying to gain something outside of this from themselves, and I have a choice of how I react to that. So I can sit in that victimhood, I can sit in that blame state, but that doesn't serve me.
Yeah.
And someone says to me, how can you forgive him? You talk to him so openly, so freely now. And it's been a process to get to that point, but forgiveness wasn't really about him. Forgiveness has never been about the other person. The forgiveness is always about you, because until I was able to forgive, I couldn't move on. It's like that saying, whereas you drink poison, if you keep drinking the poison, forgiveness, so hate, resentment, the other person doesn't suffer when you have feelings of upset, hurt, rage. Sorry, I know there's a mic around, I keep patting it. Upset, rage, hurt. It's not the other person. It wasn't him that was hurting. It wasn't him that was affected by that. It was me. I was drinking the poison over and over again. So as soon as I was able to forgive, it meant that I could move on with my life. I could move forward. I could have power back. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I like the fact that you are stating that it's okay to be sad or upset or frustrated, along with at the same time, because we are capable of doing that. We are capable of being frustrated at a situation and then at the same time understanding the situation for what it is. So I like that you're putting it that way. You know, you're going to be, most people, unless you just have an awful marriage, are going to be upset or feel a certain way. And that's fine. But at the same time, you know, you can pull yourself out of that and, start to kind of have some empathy for the situation or for the people involved, because we're all human. I think that that's great.
Yeah. And with that, we're meant to feel. I'd be really concerned if I came across somebody that was going through something as big as that and there was zero emotion
Good point.
around it at all. That could mean a lot of things, and that some people do end up to that point where they've just gotten almost an empty feeling about the situation because it's hurt so much that you just close it off.
Yeah.
And for me, that's more worrying than somebody who feels their feelings and then can rationalize the situation or logically look at the situation objectively. And it's about accepting. So what I found really, really helped me, and this is why I love the EFT process as well, is that the first part of emotional freedom technique, or tapping, because some people might know it as tapping, is that naming of the emotion. What on earth am I feeling? Where do I feel it in my body? How does this show up for me? And talk about it. What are you feeling? If it's pure rage, talk about that pure rage that you're feeling. Accept it, own it as yours, rather than trying to stifle it, shove it down, or somehow hold that emotion outside of yourself. It's yours and you're feeling it, and you can own that emotion, but recognize from there that that's not what you want to feel. Because in my first, going back to the period of anxiety and depression as a mother, as a first-time mother, that first period lasted for such a prolonged period of time because I didn't give myself really any space to think about how I wanted to feel. I was so in those feelings, but they seemed outside of me and they seemed out of my control, that I didn't even think there was an option to feel anything but what I was feeling.
Yeah.
So when we start using techniques such as EFT, or when we just start recognizing that our feelings are our own and we're in control of them, we can take ownership of whatever we're feeling, feel that hurt, feel that pain, feel the anger, feel the sadness, the frustration, and then make a conscious choice to decide what you wish you could feel instead, and make that transformation. How am I going to feel that? How do I want to feel, and how can I feel that?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's great.
So yeah, when you're in that situation, feel the feelings. Let yourself feel the feelings. It's human. They're there to be felt.
Definitely. As far as your journey goes and all of the things that you've gone through up until this point today, right now, this minute, what would you say is the biggest challenge you've ever gone through? And then what did you learn from that challenge?
The biggest challenge for me was coming back to the UK and returning. So when I left the UK, it was because I didn't want to live here anymore. I was done with living in the UK. There was, I'd spent most of my childhood dreaming about where I could go that was exotic and sunny and all of these things. And so I'd finally done that. Once I'd reached Egypt, it was like, I've made the dream happen. I've gotten out. So to come back to this place of perceived safety because it was familiar to me, and to a place where I had family and I knew I'd have support. But on the flip side of that, it felt like a failure. It felt like I had just gone full circle and I'd gotten the dream and then I had it taken away and I just failed. I failed to live outside of the UK. I'd failed to live, which isn't true. I'd made it, right? But at the time it felt like, here I am again, back at home. I moved in with my grandmother, which is where I'd lived as a teenager. And I was like, goodness, I'm right back at square one. This is the biggest, and that was the biggest challenge for me mentally, was to recognize that this wasn't going backwards and it wasn't a failure. And that took a lot of mental energy, because if any of you have ever been in that space where that headspace where you feel like you've failed, you also start to doubt yourself. You begin to lack confidence that you can do anything ever again because you'll just fail at that. Yeah. Well, at least that was my thought process, was like, oh, well, what do I do now? This is it. This is the end of the road. Like, that's it, I failed. Whereas actually the truth was, it was an opportunity for a whole new story, a whole new chapter to open up for me. And it was the starting point of something. It wasn't the end. And that overcoming that again took me back to using the personal development stuff that I'd learned previously. But that was absolutely my biggest challenge, because it was no longer these people. So I'm saying, oh, accept your feelings and accept that you have a part to play and a role to play in the situation that's panned out in front of you, right? But when I then came home and I've accepted the feelings, and I'm the one who's failed, I'm the one who's back in the beginning, and suddenly that puts you back into a place of self-blame, a lack of self-worth, a lack of belief in yourself. And once you start turning the camera on yourself in that negative light, you start to lack that feeling of love, that feeling of appreciation, that feeling of worth. And that can be a really hard pit to get out of. Because whereas you can distance yourself from other people, so I can create that distance between myself and my husband or ex-husband, and created that distance between the situation there, I can't create distance between myself. And this is why self-love and acceptance is so important, because we can't get away from ourselves. You know, we're in this body, we can't get away from ourselves.
Definitely.
So yeah, for me, that's the biggest challenge, just learning to love and accept myself despite how at the time I felt that I had failed.
Definitely. Do you, or when did you yourself get involved in self-development? It seems like you kind of fell into it fairly early. Was this pre-divorce or?
This was pre everything.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So how old were you? How did that happen?
I was about 19 when I was first introduced to personal development, and I entered the work world. When I left school, I went straight into insurance sales, believe it or not. And as part of that, I was introduced to goal setting, a basic level of self-development. So just goal setting and targets, and, you know, making sure that there was a bigger dream behind the goal. So it wasn't that I want to make 3 sales this month, it's that I want this money so that I can do something really beautiful and grand with. Yeah. So that was my first step into the personal development world. And then a few years after that, I was introduced to the concept of law of attraction by, again, my sensei. So I trained to be a karate instructor, but as part of this company, as we train, we also sell memberships to the karate center. So we get free training as sales reps, and then we go on to run our own dojos within our community. Wow. And so my sensei at the time basically introduced us to the law of attraction, and he gave me this whole new opening to the world as a young woman who had lived a life being brought up believing that, you know, only wealthy people get to do the things that they want to do, and we have to work hard for absolutely everything, to then just be told, well, actually, you just have a dream. What do you want in life? And desire it and work towards it and focus on it, and you can have that. I was like, wow, you're telling me as a young adult walking into the world, I can have whatever I want? Brilliant, I'll take that. So from there, I started attending personal development seminars. I attended conferences. I'd attended all sorts of weird and wonderful things as I just delved into this world of personal growth, of realizing that who I wasn't predetermined, because I just assumed that I was me, and me is me, and me is me for life, and that beyond educational knowledge, I couldn't really change aspects of myself. I couldn't change my personality or grow as an individual. I couldn't become emotionally more aware. Emotional intelligence wasn't even on my radar then. So yeah, it was a beautiful world. But I didn't really use any of that stuff. So I read about it, I learned about it, I attended conferences because it was interesting, but I didn't really understand the power of putting it into practice until these events happened. And so I'm so glad that those people along my life journey at that stage gave me these little introductions, little hints. My first experience of EFT was way before my son was born. It was at one of these conferences. And at the time, I thought this lady was crazy. She stood up on stage, and I don't even remember. All I remember was her saying, you know, follow along with me and tap and repeat after me. And there was just like this audience around me, and then just a huge mix of reactions. One, you know, someone sitting next to me was just looking at me going like, I don't know, I'm not tapping. This woman's mad. Like, what is this? What's she trying to do? Other people like really tapping along and really involved and looking like they were getting so much from it. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on. So I just did it and forgot about it. By the time the conference was over, I was like, completely got from my mind. And it was only when I was looking into ways to overcome anxiety that I saw EFT mentioned in an article. And then a friend again mentioned to me, have you tried tapping? And I was like, I remember this lady from this conference doing tapping. Yeah. That's my only experience. I need to go and find out what this is and how it works and why it works.
Wow.
So if I hadn't have had that experience, it might have taken me longer to get here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Who knows?
Isn't it crazy?
It is. And that's what I'd like to remind people, that if you have a dream or a desire, some form of ambition that you're sitting on and perhaps believing that it's not possible for you right now, or putting off, or there's a lot of reasons why you're not actually pursuing that yet, I just want to remind people that you don't know that if you take that one step, that one foot through the door, the one little action, not only how that's going to impact your life and how you're going to go on to achieve success, which is beautiful, but how big of an impact you can have on somebody else's life. I'm pretty sure the person who taught me about goal setting back in our sales training had no idea that I'd go on to use that in my coaching practice. I'd go on to use that to pull me out of depression and anxiety. Like, they couldn't have had an idea because they didn't know I was going to go through that stuff.
Yeah.
And what you do has that impact. It has that ripple effect upon other people too. And so I just think that's really a beautiful thing to remember, that you can have a powerful, powerful impact with just a really small action, a small decision that you make, a small bit of knowledge that you share with someone, a bit of wisdom that you share with someone. It's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, even just sharing your story, because, you know, listening to a story here, for instance, on this podcast might not make a knee-jerk pivot. However, it could be a little step up where they listen to one more, and then maybe listen to one more over the duration of maybe a year or two. And it's the combination of those 2 or 3 or 4 things that actually get them to take a step. You know, which is why it's important to speak, to educate, to tell stories in order to enlighten, you know, other people on a possible different way of doing life. There's lots of different ways of doing it, you know?
Absolutely.
And a lot of times the way that our parents taught us is not congruent with what we authentically need. Go ahead.
It's really absolutely true. And going back to the parents thing, it might have worked for them. Those beliefs that they're holding on to, or that they've passed down to you, or that you've seen and experienced and you're replicating in your own life, may have served them, probably did serve them at some point in their own lives. And it got them here safely to the point that they're at in their life today. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's true for you, that you have to hold on to it, or you have to do life in that way if it's not serving you.
100.
And there's a complete power in recognizing that this is a pattern that you're repeating and you're not really sure why you keep repeating it. So even with my husband and the situation that happened there, and the unfaithfulness and the lack of trust, boy, this isn't the first time this has shown up in my life. Some of my very first relationships had ended in very similar ways, with a lot of distrust or a lot of hurt, or various like relationships during my teenage years and into my early adolescence. I can see how that pattern kept evolving, and I can also see my part to play in that, how I not only responded to that, but how perhaps some of my behaviors may have led to that along the way. That doesn't excuse what they did, but I can recognize that I had a role to play in that's things I've done along my life. And this is not placing blame either. This is just saying, oh, this is a pattern of behavior for me. Is this pattern serving me? Do I keep falling back to this place? Just like I kept falling back to this place of feeling victimized. And feeling victimized, I recently, so very, very recently, Sabrina, I did a hypnosis regression, which was just last week. And in this regression, I went back to an event that I had completely blocked out of my memory. I didn't recall it. I recall it now, but I didn't recall it then prior to going into this regression. And afterwards, I regressed to a state of needing affection, which I'd spent a long time in my childhood needing to seek affection from people. Like it wasn't something that I was getting where I needed to get it from, so I was seeking it in really destructive ways. But what's interesting is that when I received the affection, when I received the compliments, when I received that, I'd then reject it all. It's like, I need to hear it. But actually, I didn't really believe this, so I'm gonna like kind of push it away. And so after this regression, although I haven't felt like that for a really long time, this regression took me back to a state of, for like a couple of days, of just needing people to love on me. Like, I need you to love on me. Just tell me how great I am. Like, I'm reverting back to that pattern of behavior. But now, with the insights that I have, I was able to go, hold on, Amber, you're sitting in this pattern. Like, why are you suddenly back here? This is a very familiar feeling. How many times has this showed up in different parts of your life? And I'm happy to like share that openly with you guys, just to let you know that we're like, none of us who have been through events and overcome them are in any way this perfect molded person now in my life. Like, I still revert to old patterns of behavior. I still have things that show up and I go, oh yeah, that's not serving me anymore. Mm-hmm. It served a purpose once, but now this is just becoming actually quite destructive and destructive in my life. And so once you're able to recognize those patterns and where they originate from, does it stem from your parents? Is it an experience in your childhood, or whatever it might be for you? You can then start to understand on a conscious and subconscious level where actually this isn't protecting me anymore. It isn't serving the purpose that it once served me. Or maybe it never served a purpose in the first place, and it's a belief that you just somehow took on board as your own. And then you can start to realize that you can actually begin to let that go. You can begin to do the healing that you need to do. So there was definitely some deep healing work that I've been working on over the past few days to get to the root of that need for affection due to a lack of an affection, right?
Totally.
And I needed to heal from that. So there may be patterns that are showing up for you. If you are going through anything similar to what I went through, anybody listening to this, recognize that if this is a recurring pattern, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
You just because it keeps showing up for you doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. There may be a program of pattern behavior in a program inside your subconscious that's showing up around this behavior because, and here's the beautiful thing, because it wants you to address it. It wants you to heal from it. When you start looking at it as an opportunity as opposed to a fault or something that needs fixing. Someone said to me, oh, there's always limiting beliefs. There's always limiting beliefs to be reframed. There's always limiting emotions, and there's just so much work to be done. And I was like, it's not work. It's beautiful. It's a journey. It's healing. It's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
And so we have a choice at how we look at that.
Definitely. Yeah.